According to Forbes, 15 to 20% of the U.S. population identifies as neurodiverse, including up to 10% of people who are diagnosed with dyslexia, while 5% of the population identifies as ADHD with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Meanwhile, 1 to 2% of the population falls into the category of having autism. Dr. Christopher Scott Wyatt is an autistic self-advocate, father of 2 neurodiverse daughters. He earned his doctorate while researching students with autism spectrum disorders. His experience living with physical and neurological differences has shaped his parenting. He consults with schools, businesses, nonprofit organizations on issues pertaining to autism, neurodiversity, and active inclusion. He joined me this week to have a conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and why Wyatt says conversations about tolerance and awareness simply isn't good enough when we have a conversation about the full integration and inclusion of individuals who are neurodiverse. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. Take a moment to welcome you to the program, buddy, and I'm super excited to talk to you about diversity, equity, and inclusion today. Great to see you, and thank you for a few minutes, buddy.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Now, Chris, I know that you're the father of 2 neurodiverse daughters, so tell me, what does diversity, equity, and inclusion mean to you?
I think we are a long ways from inclusion in our societies. What it means to me is that everyone should have an equal opportunity to be involved and connected to their communities, to their schools, to their employers, to the organizations in which they belong. And unfortunately, we find that many communities, whether it's the school community, the work community, or even the communities in which we live, have barriers that prevent us from being fully included as active participants. And so diversity and inclusion to me would be that state where all of us can equally participate, if we choose, in the communities in which we live and function as students, employees, citizens, individuals. So for me, it's that stage where we can choose to be as involved as we want to be, not only as involved as the obstacles will allow us to be.
Absolutely. And Chris, I'm also wondering your thoughts on what does effective advocacy mean to you as well?
It means individuals like us speaking up for our needs. I think being an effective advocate means speaking up for yourself and for others when you see an obstacle. I think too often it is easy to be quiet. And effective activism requires that we call out things even in our own lives that we might be doing. So an effective advocate is also self-critical. I think about my classroom, I think about how I'm teaching, I think about my workspaces. So an effective advocate doesn't just tell other people what they're doing that that could be done better. But we also look at what we are doing as individuals and ask ourselves, how could we be better role models for diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, absolutely. And your experiences living with physical and neurological differences, I know it has shaped your parenting as well. So tell me how it's impacted you from a parenting perspective.
As a student and just as a young person, I experienced obstacles to inclusion and to participation that I'm more actively trying to ensure a better experience for my daughters, because I had those experiences being excluded from classrooms or being excluded from activities, even later on as an adult in the workplace and in the university. I want to make sure that teachers and classmates understand that they need to actively include my children and all other children in the learning experience, in the social experience, in sports and music and the other extracurricular experiences. It is important to take what I have experienced, and instead of thinking of it just as a negative, it's not enough to say, I was treated poorly in these situations. That's not useful to be angry and bitter. It's more useful to say, okay, I know that I had a difficult time in physical education. How can I ensure that my daughter is able to be in PE and have a rewarding physical education experience? Or I had a difficult time with my music teacher. How can I make sure that my daughters who love music are exposed and get to participate in music class? So instead of being angry or bitter about what my experiences were, I need to take those experiences and use that knowledge to ensure my daughters and other children have a better experience.
And yeah, absolutely. And I know that you consult with school boards, businesses, and nonprofits on issues of autism and neurodiversity. So talk to me about continuing the conversation of inclusion and what that means to you.
Unfortunately, school districts and businesses tend to reach out to consultants or speakers like myself and others who are in the disabilities communities. They tend to contact us after they're having problems. And that's really sad to me, that a school will call me or a business may say, we have some neurodiverse employees. Maybe they have dyslexia, ADHD, synesthesia, autism. It doesn't matter, but the employee or the school is already having a problem. Then they call someone like myself or another advocate to come in and do training or to speak and raise awareness. That's too late. There's already a conflict, there's already somebody unhappy, something's already gone wrong. Really, they need to be doing this training and inclusivity ahead of time. But they do tend to reach out to us and to learn about disability after they have a student or an employee with a special need. And I could be upset about that, and I am, but the right thing to do is to say, okay, we have a problem. How can I help you solve it? How can I help go in and talk to you about what it means to have a neurological difference? People can see when I need a cane. People can see when I have a palsy, and they can respond. But people can't always see something like dyslexia, right? They can't see that you're having problems reading. They can't see that you have dysgraphia, trouble writing. Maybe they can't see your autistic traits or your sensory processing issues. So people tend to be a lot better today at accepting someone in a wheelchair or accepting someone who's blind. Yet there is still a lot of bias against the invisible disabilities. People will say things like, You're just lazy. You're not trying hard enough. What do you mean you can't read this? Or what do you mean the lights are giving you a headache? Come on, they're just lights. And so you have to do a lot of training to explain to people that not every difference is visible. Not every difference is, like right now, we're on Zoom, so you can't see this, but my right arm is trembling from my palsy. But in person, someone can see that and say, oh, well, your arm is trembling, so I'm not going to hand you something to your right arm. But when I have an autistic episode where colors or light or sounds are bothering me, they can't see that and they don't always respect it. So I have to teach teachers and employers and coworkers and co-students, co-learners, here's what we need to do. We need to actually pay attention to what people say. If I say I'm having difficulty reading something, then assume I'm telling the truth and ask me how we can make it easier to read, or how can we present the information in a new way. So what I try to do is get people aware that not every obstacle is visible. Not every obstacle is like a wheelchair or a cane. Some obstacles are invisible, and yet they're still just as serious. And that's what I try to do, is try to explain that not every obstacle is visibly obvious.
Yeah, Chris, I'm also wondering your thoughts on the idea of societal equity in terms of making society more equitable for folks with disabilities. If someone asked you to create a blueprint to accomplish that goal, where do you think you would start?
The first thing I would like to see as a parent and teacher are school spaces that are more accessible to all individuals. And we call this inclusive design, natural accommodations. There should be ramps to every classroom instead of steps, right? There should be elevators that are wide enough and accessible enough in every building to get to second or third floors. There should be control in individual rooms over the lighting. So if I need to dim the lights for students who get migraines, I can dim the lights. It shouldn't just be a master controlling everything. We need to give people control over their spaces. And if we start with our schools, our K-12s, then we start doing it in our public spaces, our government offices, our post offices, our departments of motor vehicles. Those are not always accessible places. And then we need to encourage employers to do this. What I don't want to do is tell people, we're going to fine you and we're going to run you out of business. I don't want to get in fights with people. What I want to tell them is, if you put a ramp in here at your entrance, more customers can get in, more students can get in. You can have more business, or you can have more students. So my dream is that we adopt inclusive designs that, instead of feeling like a burden, people start realizing that it benefits everybody. I don't want people to think of us as burdens. In fact, if you do natural accommodation, everyone benefits. Everyone gets to control the space. Everyone gets to be more comfortable. And so for me, in an inclusive world, it begins with everyone asking other people, how can I help you? Really, that's where it starts. How can I help you? It's the boss who says, how can I help you do your job? Oh, well, in my case, maybe I need a trackball instead of a mouse. I use screen reading software and I use dictation software. So asking me, can we get you a headset for dictation so you can do reports verbally? Just ask me, or I can tell you. Instead of making me have to go to HR or go to disability services and fill out forms and prove I'm disabled and get a letter from the government that says I get these accommodations, why don't we just ask people, how can we help you? Just asking that simple question at school and at work, how can I help you do better, would make the world a much better place.
Yeah, absolutely. If you just take a few minutes to ask, it makes a big difference, doesn't it?
It does. You know, if someone asks you, what would you like in this classroom? Then you could say, here's what I need to be the best student I can be. And in a workplace, if I ask you, what do you need as an employee? And you can come back to me. You're a media journalist. You're doing this podcast just as I do. And if an employer said, we really want you to be our professional podcaster, what do you need? The next thing they need to do is listen to your answer. So if you say, I need this kind of headset best for my hearing, or I need this type of screen for my vision, may I have this kind of thing to help me with my mobility? That's when we get further. If you give your employees or your students the things they need to be comfortable, they will try to succeed. Nobody wants to fail.
Yeah, absolutely. And Chris, you also said that awareness and tolerance isn't enough. So I'm wondering if you could dive deeper in that for me this morning.
It's not enough to say, I am aware of diversity. Okay, I can be aware that people are from different ethnic backgrounds, different religions, and different physical and mental needs. I can be aware, and I can still be a jerk. Being aware of difference, some people even become worse jerks. You know, you see people who are aware of difference, and so what they do is they avoid the difference. You know, someone might be aware of your skin color or aware of your accent or aware of your disability and walk further away from you. Well, they're aware, but that's not a good thing. And tolerance to me is I tolerate something I don't like. I can tolerate the heat, or I can tolerate the cold. That's not what we want. We don't want to be tolerated. I don't want to be tolerated as if I'm a burden, but okay, we'll put up with you. No, I don't. I want it more than that. I want to be included, right? It's diversity and inclusion. And so I want to be part of the conversation. I don't want you walking away from me. I don't want you aware of me, but afraid of me. I don't want you aware of me and tolerating me because HR said you had to hire me, or in your classroom because the school district had to follow the law that says I get to be in your class. I don't want to be tolerated or aware. I want you to accept and include. And that's a big next step. Sure, we can be aware of difference, but do we learn about it? Does someone ask us about our disability? Do they ask us how to help us? And do they ask us how to be included in those conversations? If someone says, well, we're going to have a diversity of experience and diversity of needs in hiring, and they bring you into a workplace, they should want to learn from you. They should want to say, how can we help you participate? Tolerating me in the room is not helping me participate in that room, in that community. I want to participate in my community. As I said at the beginning, that to me is effective activism, is making sure my daughters are not just accepted and tolerated in PE or music or art or their English and math classes, but that they are actively included.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, Chris, there's a sign in my office that says inclusion is the gateway to independence, isn't it?
It is. And if we're not included, it's not enough. Everyone I know wants to succeed. Everyone I know wants to feel valued. And that value is not about money. It's not about just earning a living. It is about being part of the team. It's about being included in the final product. If I'm in a classroom and I don't get to participate in any of the projects or activities, I'm not being included. I'm simply being accepted for being there. I'm being tolerated. If I'm being included and I get to be part of the play, be part of the music festival, be part of the art festival, that's different. Inclusion makes me feel valuable. Inclusion makes me feel like I should care about the rest of the community too. If I don't include you, why would you ever include me in the future?
Yeah, that's true. And Chris, you're also saying there's a way that educators can embrace neurodiversity. So tell me all about it.
Every brain works differently. And we need to stop thinking of students who have um, autism or ADHD, dyslexia, as I said, this long list of different neurologies. Instead of saying that those students are neurodiverse and everyone else is neurotypical, I don't believe that. I think everyone is neurodiverse in some way. My wife's brain isn't my brain, and it's not her coworker's brain. Our brains are all different. Some people are introverts, some people are extroverts. Some people like hot days, some people like cold days. Our brains and our preferences are all different. How we learn is different. So what teachers need to do is develop lessons and learning strategies that work for everybody. We tell teachers and we teach teachers, oh, well, you need to include the auditory learning. You need to include the visual learning. You need to include the kinetic learning. We say those things, but research has shown there aren't really just kinetic learners or people who are just auditory learners. Learning styles in that sense has been proven wrong. That's somewhat of a myth. Everybody uses a little bit of all of their senses, all of their styles to learn. So teachers need to teach with some lecture, some auditory, some writing, some touch, even some smell, right? Let's smell the ingredients that we're using in a cooking lesson. Let's taste and smell and touch. So what teachers need to do is develop lessons that include all these different aspects so your entire brain is stimulated. When I do my classes, I make sure that I record audio so students who want to listen later can listen. I type up my lecture notes for those students who want to read my notes because that's how they learn even more, so they can read my notes. I do a little bit of lecture, but a whole lot of class discussion. I do a lot of projects so students, once they learn something, can be doing something because you learn by doing. So what we need to do if we're going to have a truly neurodiverse experience is we need to use all of these things in our lessons. We can't just lecture sometimes and other times do reading assignments, sometimes do hands-on. Everything we give to students should be available in a variety of ways. Too often, teachers will only record a lecture if they're told that they have a blind student and they have to record it. But I know people who aren't blind who learn very well listening to the lectures again and again. I've been told by teachers, well, I'm only going to type up my notes if I'm told that I need to for a student who needs notes. I type up all of my notes and I give all my notes to all my students. A student might not need everything I give them, but then the student can choose what he, she, or they need. That student can choose to listen to the podcast. They can choose to read the lecture notes. They can choose to do the exercises or the activities. By giving them all of these choices, I'm allowing students to reinforce learning in whatever way or ways they find best. One of the benefits of the pandemic, and there aren't very many of these benefits, but one benefit is a lot of teachers who weren't preparing lecture notes, who weren't preparing audio or video, who weren't making their classrooms accessible to everyone, were forced to make their classes accessible because they had to put some of the materials on computer. I now want this to be a forever thing. I think every teacher from this day forward, from the pandemic forward, should have their lecture notes on computer for people to download. I think teachers should have their audio and video to download. They should make them available in text. You're in Canada, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
So My students here in Texas, many of my students speak multiple languages. They might speak Spanish, they might speak Vietnamese, they might speak English. In Canada, maybe it's English, Farsi, French, German. You have a lot of immigrants in some of your major cities as well. By putting my notes online, some of my students take my notes and they go to Google Translate and they get the notes translated into their language, their native language. That's wonderful. I don't care if you read my notes in English or Spanish. I love it. And by making my notes online, my students can just choose a website and automatically hear the notes in another language. I don't care. Why should a teacher have to say, you need to know English this way, learn on paper or learn from lecture? An inclusive classroom gives students the power, gives employees the power to make things work for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And Chris, when we talk about the word empowerment, I'm curious to get your thoughts on what comes to mind.
Empowerment to me means that the student or the employee has a voice in creating change. I am empowered if I can change our office environment, my classroom environment. Empowerment gives me a say. Empowerment, we too often think that you have to be rich or you have to be, a white Protestant who speaks English in the United States. No, empowerment just is giving people that ability to be heard and to help create change. Empowerment is, to me, power. When we think about power and we talk about people who are oppressed, the way we end oppression is not by letting the people who were oppressed become oppressors. That's the worst thing you can do. I don't think it's fair to say, okay, well, we haven't had enough indigenous teachers or indigenous principals, so we're going to make all of our principals Native people. That doesn't solve anything because now they're still principals. And the real problem to me is that we have an administrator leading a classroom instead of the teacher. I don't want to simply flip the power structure because that's still a power structure. What I want to do is empower the student, empower the teacher, empower the individual. You're not creating diversity just by putting more people in charge who look different. They're still in charge. The whole problem is that we have this idea of, as the teacher, I'm in charge. No, my students should have a say. I want to ask my students, what should we do to best learn what it is I'm teaching? And then I listen to them. Now, I'm still the subject matter expert. I am still the expert in my field where I have a degree, but I want to listen to my students. So if my students say, Dr. Wyatt, can we do something that for our community while we learn about web design? Great, let's create websites for our community that will teach the community. And I let the students choose the projects and I let the students choose the outcome. Yes, there's still a little bit of teacher power because I do have to give a grade, but even for grading, I let my students tell me, what grade do you think you earned and why? And they call that, peer review and portfolio grading. When we talk about empowerment, the whole key to empowerment isn't having, like I said, new leaders or new bosses who look different, because then it's just the same old power with new faces. If all you do is flip the oppressor and the oppressed, so now they switch places, and what have you gained?
And Chris, tell me, when we talk about services for students with neurodiversity, how do you think we can better offer those services or streamline them so the waiting list for services isn't so long?
We have not prioritized the value of people. We look at someone and we judge them and their ability to contribute superficially. We need more trained experts on inclusion. We need more trained architects for inclusive design, like ramps and windows. And so we need better training for our architects, our teachers, all these things. Everybody needs to be trained to create an inclusive world. And that means, as I said at the very beginning, we have to be self-critical of what we're doing too. So as a teacher, I shouldn't have to send you to disability services, and I shouldn't have to ask disability services what you need. As a teacher, because I'm putting my notes online, because I'm recording my lectures, because I'm asking you what you need, in my dream world, you should never have to go to student services to get a letter to come to me to say, look, Dr. Wyatt, I have special needs. The fact that you have to go and get that help makes me sad.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we look at your individual and personal legacy, Chris, I'm wondering how you want that to be defined.
I want people to think back and instead of thinking of me, thinking of my students. So they think about, or the people I've worked with, and they say, wow, that individual is really, really a great person and really, really working for a better society. I would like to think that as a teacher, that's where I've made a difference, is that my students try to make the world a better place, and that my daughters will try to be good people who make the world a better place.
Yeah, absolutely. And Chris, tell me, finally, if people want to get connected with the podcast or you personally, what's the best way they can do that?
So the Autistic Me podcast is on all of the major podcasting platforms under The Autistic Me. And I use that title because I interview a lot of different individuals, and they are individuals. They are me. They are themselves. There's also The Autistic Me on Facebook and Twitter. It's really important to have all of these voices. I happen to be a white male diagnosed autistic and ADHD and some other things, right? And with physical disabilities as well. My voice, it's very easy for me to get a voice. I'm a professor. It's easy for me. So part of what I want to do on the podcast, on the blog, I've been blogging since 2007, and I want to bring as many voices, as many experiences as I can, because my experience is just one. And I want us to get away from thinking these are the things that are autism, these are the things that are dyslexia, these are the things that are muscular dystrophy, these are the things that are paralysis. I want people to hear individual voices who get to say, this is me. So I encourage people to look for The Autistic Me on Facebook, to look for us and to follow the podcast. If I make any difference at all, it's that I'm giving my students a voice and giving other people a voice. So on Facebook, it's just facebook.com/autisticme.
Well, fabulous, Chris. I really want to thank you for the work that you do in the field of diversity, equity, and inclusion for folks who are neurodiverse. Your work in the space, my friend, and time on my behalf is most appreciated. And I want to thank you for engaging in conversation with me today.
It is an honor, and I appreciate working with a fellow self-advocate who is out there letting us have voices. I think that's what we should all be doing. So I appreciate what you're doing to give me and others a voice as well. Thank you so much.